We'll go ahead and start with opening prayer, and Carol has graciously offered to lead that for us.
Pray with me, please. Creator of all humanity, we call you holy and seek to worship you all the days of our life. We pray that the ways of your kingdom may be revealed in the world that surrounds us. May the bread we need today be made available for us and all who are hungry, and may we forgive as you have forgiven us. In the time of moral testing, may we listen first for your voice calling to us. This world and all that is in it always has been and always will be yours. Help us to lose ourselves to you and your kingdom. Help us to find who we truly are as we walk in your light. In the name of him who loved us first and best. Amen.
Thanks, Carol. Okay. Our Vox values. The church exists to love and serve the world, not stand in judgment of it. Oh, it looks like someone added, maybe Bob added these. Jesus of Nazareth is the full and final picture of what God is like, and we're committed to being a Jesus-shaped community. The church should be the safest place to talk about anything, and our service today is a classic example of that. Come with all your doubts, questions, addictions, hang-ups, screw-ups, and brokenness. Vox is a place of permission. It's safe to belong. And the church should captivate the hearts and minds of the next generation. We got a house full of kiddos in there right now, enjoying each other's company and learning about the love of God. So we'll include the kids whenever we can, generally be adventurous and try some new things. And it's okay if some of it doesn't work. And then, as we traditionally have done for a long time now, we'll read the one scripture reading in 3 different versions. And first up, I believe it's one of the Salts. Normally, Joanna reads the First Nation if I'm.
Yeah. Thanks, Casey. Good morning, everyone. Here is another way to see what I am saying. Red Clay, who is Adam, was the first human being to fail to live the life he was created for. His broken ways brought death to all who followed in his footsteps, for death comes from following bad hearts and broken ways. These broken ways were already at work in the world, even before our tribal law was given. But where there is no law, no one can be guilty of breaking it. Even so, death still came to all who lived from red clay to drawn from the water, who's Moses, who gave us the law. Yes, death ruled over all who walked in broken ways, even over the ones who did not fail in the same way red clay failed. But as we will see, red clay was in many ways like the one who would come later, the chosen one. But not in all ways, for the false step of red clay cannot be compared with the gift of Creator's great kindness shown to us in the chosen one. If one man's failure brought death to human beings, then how much more will Creator's great kindness gifted to us through the goodwill of one man, Creator sets free, Jesus, the chosen one, overflow to all with new life? Here is another way to see it. Red Clay's one failure was repeated over and over again, bringing guilt and shame to all who followed in his footsteps. But the gift of Creator's great kindness overcame those many failures and gave human beings a path to good standing with him once again. If death overcame all human beings because of the wrongdoings of one man, then how much greater will it be for the ones who receive this gift of good standing and overflowing kindness? I will tell you, through Creator sets free, the chosen one, they will guide others with the wisdom and honor of a chief as they walk this road of life. And if the false steps of one man led to guilt and shame for all human beings, then another man's true and firm steps will bring life and good standing to all human beings. Again, if one man who followed his bad heart passed it on to many others, then one man who walks with a good and upright heart will pass on that good heart to many others.
All right, thanks, Joanna. Okay, next up we have our what's going on at Vox announcements. First up, we always like to celebrate the birthdays this month. So Jill and Andy celebrated theirs earlier. Joanne, who is here with us, just celebrated earlier this week. Happy birthday, Joanne. Sounds like she got to work on her birthday, which sounds like a lot of fun.
Very adult birthday, yes.
And then yeah, Paige will be celebrating hers tomorrow. Rounded out by Jackie Park at the end of the month, a little bit later this week. Okay, the men's and women's hangouts. Just had the women's this past Thursday. Anyone here go to that? Well, hopefully they had a good time. And then yeah, the men's will be this Thursday. We had a really fun one last week. Fernando made his famous Pizzoli soup. It was really good. So excited to hear what Andy has in store for us this month. And yeah, although we discussed these events in binary ways, anyone is welcome no matter how they attend. All right, our upcoming Sundays. So we're coming down to the wire here with Acts. This will next month will round us out. I think we'll finish it out, right, Tim? So we'll have a deeper dive discussion next week at the Nullmeyers. We're Matt Nicolaitis is going to be doing a series for us this year on the different writing styles in the Bible. Each book has a different style, and it's important to kind of know how to read each book and the context that it's in. So Matt's going to walk us through that this year. Excited for that. Bonnie, as usual, our all virtual service. And then Tim will be back with us again to round out Acts 28 back at our house on the 22nd. And then, haven't put the finishing details on it, but we'll likely be, enjoy a meal together with our friends at City Lights since it's a fifth Sunday, Palm Sunday. So always enjoy our time with the folks at City Lights. And then today, after our normal service here, we're gonna test drive doing our planning meeting right after this. So if you got a half hour to spare after this meeting, hopefully we can quickly identify and actually get more volunteers versus voluntold, since we'll have more people. Looking forward to trying that out today. All right, up next, we have our time of worship and communion. We've got the elements right there. If you guys want to start passing those around for those who are with us in person. But yeah, we come to the table to meet with Jesus. It's the most compelling invitation ever offered. You're invited with your questions and doubts, your hang-ups and your screw-ups, your addictions and your brokenness. The table is for us. The bread and the cup, they are for us. Okay. So we have our next scripture reading. See, I always messed one thing up. I'm going to fix it right now because I have the opportunity. NIV. There we go. Man, I even double checked it when I missed it. All right. So David, congratulations to read the NIV for us today.
Thank you. Romans 5, go out for 19. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people because all sinned. To be sure, sin was in the world before the law was given, But sin is not charged against anyone's account where there is no law. There, nevertheless, death reigned from the time of Adam to the time of Moses, even over those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam, who was a pattern of the one to come. But the gift is not like the trespass. For if the many died by the trespass of the one man, how much more did God's grace and the gift that came by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, overflow to the many? Nor can the gift of God be compared with the result of one man's sin. The judgment followed one sin and brought condemnation, but the gift followed many trespasses and brought justification. For if by the trespass of the one man death reigned through that one man, how much more will those who receive God's abundant provision of grace and of the gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ? Consequently, just as one trespass resulted in condemnation for all people, so also one righteous act resulted in justification and life for all people. For just as through the disobedience of the one man, the many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the one man, the many will be made righteous.
Okay. All right. So yeah, we have our dear friend, the good Dr. Gombis with us this morning. Cool. So yeah, a quick question for you, Tim. Are you a fan of the Winter Olympics? And if so, what are your favorite events of the Olympics?
Currently.
No, I'm not a fan.
Wow.
Like
Can I say that out loud?
thinking literally. Like, am I fanatical about it? Like, do I behave unreasonably about it? No, but I enjoyed it. Like I enjoyed watching the end of the game today. Yeah,
Including being ice hockey?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But
Yes.
there's a lot. There's a lot. Yeah, I don't know. I was a figure skater growing up.
No.
Yeah.
Like,
We have videos or pictures.
No,
Spins can be different.
yeah.
more than you would expect. I was a figure skater growing up, and
Prove it.
also yeah, I played hockey and tried to tell my mom I'm not doing this stuff. So
Were you really a figure skater?
yeah.
You lied in the top.
Pardon? No, I never got to compete. I know this was like how deep of a dive do you want to do here?
Look at there.
I always wondered where figure skaters came from.
Yeah, this probably I had enough. Like in maybe first or second grade, I was like, I don't want to do the same. I want to play hockey, so I started playing.
What was your best trick?
What couldn't I do? No, I could not do the spins. I just did the one hop thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is like 6-year-old Tim.
Great.
So I always liked hockey, so I played it, but so many of the winter sports are they're so hard to get your head around.
Right.
You know, or I should say winter Olympic events. It's hard to call them sports. They're just kind of funny. Anyway, I'm not fanatical. I don't behave unreasonably about Winter Olympics. But I'll watch it if they're on. I'll watch it. That's all. I think it was 88. Was it 88? Maybe 86 or 88. That was like the last that was the last time that it felt to me like a cultural event where like high school groups would get together and like you would watch it. Like you'd be Friday night at someone's house and it says like watch the Olympics. That's the last time for me personally.
Okay.
That I behaved unreasonably about it. That's how I think about being a fan. Like if I'm not a fan, it doesn't mean I don't like it. Anyway, we're splitting hairs. That's too long of an answer. Yeah, it depends on how many drinks I'd have in me to show off my figure skating skills. Or if I had like really slippery socks on and like on a wooden floor, I was gone.
I'm gonna figure out a way to make it isolated right out here. Challenge accepted. I'm gonna say.
Vince and Jeremy have that ring.
Down.
It's
Really awesome.
Just evolved.
Yeah. Next time we'll meet Vince and Jeremy, so he'll use that practice.
A last minute schedule change.
Yeah.
I'm like having this weird, like every figure skater's like other career is now a biblical scholar. I'm like,
What you don't know.
no, you don't.
Oh, wow. You see that first thing doing was double ass.
You also read their article on New Testament.
Yeah. If it comes to like alternative careers. Anyway, this has been just over 2 years since we started the study of Luke and Acts. We started this in January of 2024, and we'll be concluding it next month. It's really crazy that it's really wild. Feels like it's flown by. I've really enjoyed this. I've really enjoyed getting to know Luke and Acts better. It's been interesting, and so I thought it would be kind of cool to for next month we'll discuss chapter 28. But then also I think it'd be good to sort of talk a little bit about like what did we learn. So if you could think about one or two things that stuck out to you about Luke Acts, one or two things that you can see what he was trying to do, and you sort of pick that up, and maybe one or two questions that you have going forward. Like if Luke was going to be here, what would you want to ask him? Why did you write like this? Or like, I didn't like this. Or, why did you write so long? Or why did you write all of those obnoxious details about Paul's travel in chapter 27? What's a question that you have that's outstanding? Like you'd be like, I didn't, this was it's still kind of confusing to me. So yeah. And then maybe one thing that you outright didn't like, made you angry. I don't know. I'm just trying to think about targeted questions that you could focus on to come up with some stuff. For today, however, we have chapters 26 and 27. And very straightforwardly, chapter 26 is Paul is like sort of quote unquote on trial before Agrippa. And so we have his defense. And then chapter 27 is this travel section, which is really, really odd. If you read it several times and were like, what is the deal here? This is like, especially when you think about chapter 27 being part of the Bible. And sometimes I imagine like the New Testament writers sitting in New Testament writing class. Like there's like a teacher, like a trainer, like Bob is going to say like, all right, here's what you need to know. If you want to be a writer of a New Testament document, here are your options. You could write a letter, you could write a narrative, but don't go on and on and on about like a travel thing, And Luke was absent that day, and I mean, it's sort of hard to think that this is part of our Bible. Like, if I took 20 minutes and just said, at 9:54 yesterday, I called for an Uber. And then I went downstairs and I waited for the Uber, and his name was Musa. Mm-hmm. And at 10:04, Musa showed up, and I greeted him warmly. Sat in his back. If I went on all the details about my travel here yesterday, you might be like, "What are we doing with this?" Yeah. And that's sort of like how chapter 27 sounds. Like all of these obnoxious details and slow and ponderous, and like, why is that there? This is just not.
Strange. I was thinking the same thing. Like those details made it richer to me.
Oh, really?
Because you could imagine that. Yeah, I did not have that response to it at all.
That's good. Oh, I'm glad to hear that.
A bit like the Robinson Crusoe. Wow.
Yeah, or like it's a weird. It's one thing if it's like this is historical detail, but like again, it's part of the Bible. So is it like we're all sort of on a sea journey? It's like, yeah, we all sort of travel to the lee of Crete. I don't know.
I mean, a lot of people do claim that the 27:12 is sort of their light verse, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there.
Totally. This is why there's so many Chicagoans in Phoenix. Why there's so many Chicago pizza places in Phoenix. So let's talk a little bit about chapter 26, and then let's talk about 27 and why it's there and what it's actually what Luke is doing, and like certainly like what would ancient audiences think about chapter 27? Would they be similarly like baffled? Would they be similarly fascinated, or would they see this as like the absolute climax of Acts, and in fact the absolute climax of Luke and Acts, and to see that this whole thing has been building up to this heavyweight fight that is being narrated in chapter 27 between God and his chief enemy from Genesis 1 and 2. But so let's start with chapter 26 and Paul's conversation with Agrippa, because this is not necessarily like a trial, because it's not really like an official. It's sort of a royal gathering, but it's not necessarily like an official trial. It just so happens that Agrippa and Bernice are there, and Festus is like, "What do I do with this guy?" So he has him talk to him. You might have noticed how many times how many times Luke has Paul call him King Agrippa. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
It's pretty repetitive. And then looking back, actually, as well, into chapter 25, there are more mentions of King Agrippa. There are 3 more. So I think there were 5 total mentions of Agrippa as king. And I say that Luke has Paul say this because this is Luke's composition. He's actually sort of putting this speech in Paul's mouth. Not to say that Paul didn't do this or anything like that, but Luke is stressing this. And I think that is because I mentioned this last month in Luke 21:12, and then in Acts 9:15, Luke has Jesus prophesies, I believe, in Luke, and then the Lord Jesus tells Ananias, he tells something to Ananias about Paul, that Paul is going to speak before kings. And so it's important that Paul keeps saying this, because that's like a fulfillment of earlier portions in the story. And it also might be because we don't have a record here of Paul being quote unquote on trial before Caesar. This is probably like a preview of what Paul is going to be saying to Caesar. So, I mean, he's speaking this sort of to royalty. Keep in mind also that Paul is saying this with all of these, with representatives of the Sanhedrin. So there are a lot of Jews around when Paul does this. And with that in mind, it's kind of wild what Paul does here. The way that he narrates this, and keeping in mind that Agrippa is a Jew, so he knows sort of the outlines and the sort of the Jewish way of thinking, the Jewish scriptures, the Jewish sort of narrative. When Paul gives his talk about what he's doing, he does it in terms of him being in complete continuity with the scriptures. Everything he's doing is for Israel, for the promises given to the fathers. He's doing this on behalf of scripture. Everything he's doing is for the hope that God has given to Israel. And he paints himself as the same as the representatives of the Sanhedrin up through verse 12. Like in fact, he says in verse 9, I underline that word "too" in verse 9. I too. So what he's saying to Agrippa is all of these opponents that are here today accusing me, I was one of them. In fact, in verse, right in the middle of verse 11, he says, I was so obsessed with persecuting them. Like he was, and that's the record that earlier in Luke, he was so passionate about stamping out the church that he got letters from Jewish leaders to even go to foreign cities to carry out this persecuting zeal. So I was like these people, which is a pretty, I think this is a pretty bold move of what he does next. But starting in verse 13, he's going to paint himself as having been sort of given this revelation from God. And he's been, as he says in verse 19, I was not disobedient to the vision from heaven. So he was given this vision, and he's already recounted what the vision was before, but there's this little addition in verse 14 that he has not mentioned before. And he says, it is hard for you to kick against the goads, which is like basically an indication that this is what, again, these Jewish opponents are doing. They're fighting God. And he was given this commission. He's going to be a witness to all that you have seen of me. I will rescue you from your own people. Basically, God says to Paul, I will rescue you from these people that are in the room today, and from the Gentiles. Verse 18, I'm sending you to open their eyes, to turn them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God. So he's basically indicating all these people are under the power of Satan, like, that are there. They're all under the power of Satan. They're all blind, and their sins are not forgiven. So that's really bold. And then God has basically protected me from them to this day and has delivered me from them. In fact, that's pretty pivotal language. Let's see here. Yeah, that is why some of the Jews seize me and they tried to kill me, verse 21. But God has helped me to this very day. So God has delivered him from these people that have tried to kill him. And by the way, I'm just thinking about this now. If you think about chapters 26, Paul is under threat and near death, but God delivers him. And then in chapter 27, you're going to see the same thing from a cosmic aspect of things. So keep in mind, in the ancient world, the sea is God's chief enemy, a representative of all the powers of chaos that try to pull creation apart. So God has also protected him from the sea and has delivered him through the sea. And I'm just remembering that's the same doublet that occurs all the time in the Psalms. It's so striking to me. When a psalmist will say something like, my enemies came at me, and had me in the corner, and God, you delivered me, and then the waters. This is so weird to the modern ear, but it makes sense in the Old Testament to Old Testament audiences. And then the psalmist will say something like, and the waters rose and they raged, and they, the waves and all the wind of the waves, always wind and waves. And yet you rescued me and you set my feet on solid ground. So it's always because what the psalmist would be saying is, just like chaos tries to overwhelm creation, my enemies tried to destroy me. And so I'm just struck that this is what Luke is doing in 26 and 27. Like concrete instances of God delivering from human enemies, and then an instance of God delivering from the cosmic enemy, the sea. Anyway, more to say about 27 in a second. So then Paul comes to this climax about the resurrection from the dead in 23, but he's already mentioned the resurrection in verse 8. At that point, Festus, who is a Roman, so he is steeped in the Roman world, and the resurrection is just nutso to a Roman. Okay, all right, time out. Enough of this, Paul. Like this is just, we're getting off track. I wanted my colleague to hear you, and this is just none of this is really going well. And but Paul kind of presses things because it's interesting because Paul really wants sort of this this convert, Agrippa, who knows the scriptures, and he wants him to sort of see it, wants him to see that basically to come to grips with the gospel. So he sort of bypasses Festus's interruption. In the end, though, Agrippa doesn't he doesn't reject what Paul's saying, but he doesn't accept it either. It just sort of ends, and then when you get the sort of behind the scenes, kind of like at the Oscars, when after someone walks off stage, you get that the camera angle from like behind the curtain, and Agrippa and Bernice and Festus behind the curtain. They're like, "What's the deal with this guy? I mean, like, he didn't do anything wrong. If he had not appealed to Caesar, we would have just let him go." Which is actually a big part of this partakes of a big theme that is going on in Acts that we've already seen. And that is everywhere the gospel goes around the Mediterranean world, it causes trouble because corrupt values are being upset. And especially with like corrupt gender values, corrupt socioeconomic values, where the people that are representatives of the gospel are looking out for the poor. So they're upsetting power dynamics. And every time people who lose power pull the representatives of the gospel before authorities, they are checked out and they are found out to be not breaking any laws, right? And so the same happens here again. Paul gets hauled before these authorities, and the authorities are like, what is the deal? He's not doing anything wrong. So this is a big thing that Luke wants us to be seeing. Also, I think what's happening here is I think that one of the things that Luke is wanting us to see as well is kind of the human dimension of things, where Paul has been in prison here for 2 years. And he sort of comes across as irrepressible. He comes across as like, not like defiant in the face of this imprisonment, but you can't stop him. I mean, he's still doing what he's doing. Persistent, persevering, totally. Courageous even. But his incarceration has slowed things down. Like, it has hampered what he's doing. There's no way to get around that. It's been an obstacle. And I think that the Agrippa episode is sort of an instance of that. It's like he's not rejecting or accepting, and it's like fruit has been scarce. Gospel fruit's been scarce. Paul's not going to be stopped, but efforts can be thwarted to some extent. Okay, your thoughts or observations just about chapter 26. Anything jump out at you or like stick with you? We've kind of already seen the defense or Paul talking like this a couple other times. But
question I had is, how many years are we talking about from the road to Damascus to now? This is 15 years. He's locked up here for 2 years.
I think
wasn't he 10 years back in?
I think it's probably something like 18 or 19. So like because the Damascus, for a very just a brief sketch, but like the Damascus road thing happens. It's then he goes back he's in Damascus probably for 3 years. And then he goes to Jerusalem for that first time, and things go really badly. So then they sent him back to Tarsus, where he is for like 9 years.
Yeah.
Just then there's no mention of what he's doing. So that's like 12 before Barnabas gets sent from Jerusalem to, remember, he goes north to Antioch because there's an outbreak of disciples in Antioch. And then he remembers that there's this guy, Paul, that's not doing anything. And Tarsus, so he goes across to get him. So Paul's in Antioch for a couple years. And then he goes on that first journey. Barnabas and Saul go on that first journey in Acts 13, which is probably about 13 or years after Damascus. So between that event and now is maybe like 8 or 9 years. Between the Paul's first journey and now is about 8 or 9 years. But
2 years here.
Yeah, 2 years here, yeah. Yeah, so this is probably yeah. He probably starts this incarceration like 18 years after his conversion, and then he's there for 2 years. Yeah.
So he's been at this for a while.
Yeah.
Some of the folks here, certainly some of the folks from Jerusalem will remember. Well, he's an old, he's not a young guy in that culture.
Yeah.
So a lot of the younger folks will not have remembered him. They know what he's doing. Has been doing, proselytizing this different view of Judaism. Just when you're talking about the detail of the 27 with the sea journey and the shipwreck and all this, it's like a play-by-play call here compared to the previous chapter. Something is glossed over. It's like, oh, you go to the next verse and it's like, you think it's the next day, but it's been several years.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the funny things about a narrative is time is not consistent. Like it's like, oh, this is the next day. This is the next day. It's like, no, these are huge gaps of time.
But to your point about the sea being the antagonist of shalom or perfection of God's creation, maybe that that might have something to do with why there's so much detail in chapter 27 versus some of the life detail of the missionary journeys before.
Yeah. It could be. It's interesting the things that Luke's gaps are as interesting as what the details he puts in. Totally.
I guess I have a question about.
Yeah, no.
Early around 9-ish of 26. Maybe I'm putting today on that, but when he talks about how righteous he was or whatever, to the point where he was obsessed, he tried to get people to blaspheme.
Yeah.
What was his incentive if he was trying to be holy to do that? It just seems so evil, and yet he was so obsessed to do that. And then I think when you get down to God telling him in the vision, I will rescue you from your own people and from Gentiles. And then it turns right behind it. I'm sending you to them.
Yeah.
It all put pieces together that he made a radical conversion, but it still was doing what many people do. I just don't understand why he would want people to blaspheme.
Why he would?
Yeah.
In his pre-conversion state?
Right. Going after the Christians.
Yeah. So the Paul's pre-conversion mindset, which is the same as all the opponents that are there when he's giving the speech, their mindset, if you think about Jewish people in the first century, if you're situated there in the first century, you're looking, actually, his efforts were a function of his passion for God's holiness. Okay. So God's holiness in his mindset there was supposed to be reflected in Israel's complete set apartness from any of the Gentile nations. Like they're not influenced by them. They don't have relationships with them. There's no intermarriage. And so and the thought was, if Israel was just a purified nation, like a purified people, a nation, it's so small. It's like the size of LA County. But if we're purified without any influence from like the nations, we don't think in any other way, we don't have any intermarriage, then God will be so impressed that he will actually deliver us from the current Roman occupying army. But that's what we knew. So basically, it is literally the same mindset today as Christian nationalism. If we take our country back, get rid of all the people that aren't like us, and get rid of all the secular teaching in schools and all this kind of stuff, then we'll have a holy and righteous nation. It's the exact same thing. And so in Paul's memory, again, we're in the first century, looking back over the last couple hundred years, the heroes, just like our heroes are George Washington, etc. Their heroes are like Ezra and Nehemiah. And you remember from the Old Testament, there had been all these intermarriages. And it was Ezra, wasn't it? Or Nehemiah? They blend together. Let's just say it's either Ezra or Nehemiah. Where he had all these arranged and forced divorces to purify Israel from any Gentile influence. And that's like a high point of Israel's history. And then the Maccabees that came along a couple hundred years later, they drove out the Gentiles. And so like the worst thing that could happen is any kind of mixture of Gentile with the nations coming in to pollute our people. And so when looking back on the Gospel of Luke, Jesus, who is going around building these radically and scandalously inclusive communities of sinners and tax collectors, representatives of Rome, he's blurring these lines. And now that God has already said what he thinks of Jesus by killing him, he died. And so we all know what God thinks of Jesus in Paul's mind. The fact that there are all these followers that are saying that Jesus was the true representative of the God of Israel, like we've got to stamp this out because they're standing in the way of God's salvation. So in Paul's mind, they were ruining everything. But then, when Paul actually is spoken to directly by Jesus from heaven and saying, like, yeah, this is the real deal, Paul. That's what turns things around for him. And so, blasphemy in the New Testament is any kind of abusive speech. It's oftentimes used of like abusive speech against another human or abusive speech against God. And so Paul's trying to force people to basically renounce this obvious sinner against God, Jesus, speak abusively about him. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And maybe just knowing Jesus is talking to him began his belief in resurrection,
Yeah, Paul was passionate about resurrection day and night. So when he sees that this actual horrible person, Jesus, has experienced, and he's the only one, resurrection, that's the thing that turns everything around for him. It's not that Jesus is just in heaven, but the thing that Paul wants most of all for resurrection to happen to the nation of Israel and all the like everyone. Resurrection was this whole new reality. It's not just coming back from the dead. And so that it happened to that one person who's obviously the worst makes Paul realize my calculus is all wrong. So I've got to rethink everything. Does that make sense? So that's what he's trying to get all these other people to see. Like you have everything wrong, and you are the chief, most passionate students of scripture of anybody in the universe, but you have it wrong. And you just can't, who's going to see it that thinks of themselves that way? You know what I mean? I think that's the difficulty.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. All right, any other observations or questions about chapter 26?
Well, it was interesting to me, kind of going on what you just said, he said in, was it 26:6, it's because of my hope of the resurrection that I'm on trial.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, really? you know, because it seemed like he was on trial for like
Yeah,
starting riots, you know, and things like that.
yeah.
So I'd love to maybe hear kind of your thoughts on that. And I wondered if part of it was I went back and I looked at it and it seemed like the chief priests and the Sanhedrin were all part of the Sadducees. And that was an argument that Paul had made earlier. Hey, I believe in the resurrection. And then he divided the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So is he kind of still keeping up with that particular way of doing it? It's like, hey, I'm going to try to anger these Sadducees. I don't know. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, he gets to set the terms, so he's going to obviously set the terms in as like, I'm on trial for the hope of Israel. I'm not on trial for what they say.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, but this, and then also, this is actually, this is pretty much how Paul would have talked before he ever met Jesus. Is that because the Pharisees were the group of people that were passionate about the resurrection. They believed, they believed that God was going to rescue Israel. And when we think about resurrection for Israel, for the Pharisees meant Roman oppression gone. Israel's economy is flourishing. There are no poor people. We're the breadbasket of the world. The nations are jealous of us. There's universal flourishing among Israel. And the God of Israel, we're once again experiencing the kingdom of God. That's what resurrection means. It's just that when Paul was a Pharisee, he thought that came about by having all the sinners become Pharisees in Israel. That's why he was so coercive. So yeah, now that he has seen Jesus as the risen and exalted, I'm trying not to use any kind of evangelical language. Now that he has Jesus in his heart, it's like now that he sees Jesus as cosmic Lord, he sees that like his being a Pharisee was right. He just had a couple things wrong about sinners needing to be eliminated, or they were the problem, or anything like that. But still, resurrection is what it was all about. So, and also you'll see in all these instances, he keeps identifying himself as a Pharisee. So, that one time when he was before the Sanhedrin, he does say he identifies himself with the resurrection. Maybe the cynical side of us could say he does this to turn them against themselves, Sadducees and the Pharisees against each other. But you could also say he was doing it to basically say, brothers, all I'm doing is standing in complete consistency with the scriptures of Israel. I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary here. I'm with you people. It's just that you don't see it yet. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. Yeah. And I was in prep for this. Maybe I read something and the person was kind of arguing against, we shouldn't call it Paul's conversion because of that, right? Because he was always a Jew and remained a Jew.
Yeah.
He didn't convert to anything.
Totally. Yeah, it's a way of talking that kind of helps us because that's our language.
Yeah.
But Paul would never, to convert. Yeah. It's a very interesting conversation to think about conversion because he's not really converting. He's sort of no longer being an opponent of Jesus. But it's not like he leaves Judaism or he leaves being a Pharisee or something like that at all. And really, maybe conversion language actually hurts us from understanding these passages because he is emphasizing continuity. Like, I'm the one who's actually been listening to the scriptures. It's just that Jesus commanded me to do this. In fact, perhaps instead of saying that Paul converted, we could say Paul was commissioned. Because he doesn't get this vision from heaven to say, hey, you're a sinner, you need to get saved. He's like, I'm grabbing hold of you and sending you. He gets sent. He's commissioned as an apostle. Or as a witness. Remember that all the witness language in Acts is the people that have seen the risen Jesus. And Paul, I think witness language is used actually here in this language, in this passage, isn't it? Yes, in verse 16. Now get up, stand on your feet. I've appeared to you to point you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen and will see of me. And so, like, what Paul is, what he's seeing is basically all the events unfold in Acts is all activity of Jesus in Luke's telling of the story. Actually, it's kind of interesting. So yeah, it's not a conversion, more of a commission.
Jewish enlightenment.
Yeah, he's a sort of an enlightened Jew. All right, let's talk about. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Joanne.
Where he's talking to King Agrippa, it starts in verse 19 and it ends 23. That he ends with, as the first rise from the dead would bring the message of light to his own people and to the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the and the Gentiles kind of jumped out at me because he's trying to identify himself in the passage to Moses. And it's like to add the Gentiles seems just like
Yeah. Yeah, and that is not a minor detail. It's in verse 20. It's in where else? In verse 17. So the and the Gentiles part is what actually got Paul in trouble in the first place.
right.
In chapter 20, when he mentions this when they're trying to kill him. Remember, it was his point that this is all going to the Gentiles that made them all angry. So it's the point that he's going to keep hammering.
That's why
Yeah, that's huge.
he was in trouble and jail and stuff. So I was surprised why he kept bringing up I'm here because he's saying resurrection. Are you? Yeah, you know,
Say that again, Jill.
well, I thought the original way was put in jail because they were upset that we wanted the Gentiles to be involved in this.
Oh yeah.
And yet he keeps saying he's on trial because of the resurrection.
Oh yeah.
That was always confusing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if Paul would tie together resurrection and outreach to the Gentiles. Because in all of the actually we see this coming up a bunch of times in Acts, but every time I'm just thinking back to Acts 15. Every time the prophets are quoted in Acts, it always has this promise of fulfillment to Israel, fulfillment of the promises, and salvation to the nations. And the prophets always link this. When God returns, he's going to save Israel, and Israel will become once again a light to the nations. So God's salvation, which is resurrection, God's salvation and the salvation of the nations are always tied together. And I think Paul's the one that sees that clearly. You know?
So this is the first time because of what you said before that I understood maybe resurrection to me always means somebody is coming back from death.
Yeah.
You're saying resurrection is more like this collective rebirth of a nation and good things happen.
Yeah. Yeah, resurrection is not something like where the dead people get raised and stand on trial in heaven or something like that. No, it's more like it's basically another term for salvation, like life from the dead, which means this occupied territory, which we're completely under the thumb of Rome. Our economy's been devastated. There's nothing but poverty. The top 3% of our people are all in league with Rome, and they're betraying us, and there's no hope. And like what resurrection would mean is that the life of God falls from heaven and lands on our land, not the Gentiles, because we hate them, but it lands on our land, and like it just and Romans are just evaporated because God hates them too. And our economy is now robust. Our land, there's way too much crops. Everybody's fed, like, and we're not oppressed anymore. So basically, resurrection was what resurrection meant was holistic salvation, like economic, social, everything, you know. Yeah. So and which as we're seeing in Luke and Acts is what all of the early disciples are living out. They're all having meals. They're all caring for the poor. They're having this radical revision of this radical enactment of God's justice with regard to gender, social class, and ethnicity. And it's like, and that's what's getting them in trouble, like that they're enacting resurrection life, which is blessing the Gentiles, including people who have been excluded and all that kind of stuff. That's resurrection love. Okay, chapter 27, the travel itinerary. Loads and loads to say about this. First of all, this is the beginning of another we section. So Luke is with Paul, and of course Aristarchus is with Paul, which is really interesting. Another one of, I mean, we've actually seen him before in Acts. He's one of these people that's named before already. So he's been with Paul. He's been in prison with Paul. But the backstory to this is really, it's really critical that we get our ancient ears trained for this. Because in Genesis 1 and 2, the sea, well, basically all the way through the scriptures and all the way through the whole ancient world, in Egypt, Assyria, everywhere around Israel in the Old Testament, in every culture, the sea is the ultimate enemy. Like you didn't build a house by the beach, or you stayed away from the water because the sea was the enemy. And every ancient culture had a story of how we came to be. Canaanites had their stories, and every story involved their god that they worshipped defeating the sea. So, sea was super powerful, and Marduk or Tiamat or whoever the ancient god was defeated the sea and subdued it, or the Egyptian gods. They all beat the sea, and so that's actually how Genesis 1 and 2 runs. It's just that God doesn't necessarily, it's not so obvious, but you remember at the very beginning, the earth was formless and void. That is, there was nothing. There was nothing. Or no, not that there was nothing. There was formlessness and void. It was just this kind of chaotic nothingness that was unfruitful, and he didn't want to be there. And there was no light, and it was dark, and all that kind of stuff. And then God moved in, and he harnessed it. He splits the water. He splits the seas. And there's an upper sea and a lower sea. And so he puts limits on it. And then he creates land. And he tells where sea can go and where sea cannot go. And there are monsters in the sea. It's like all this Job stuff about like Leviathan and dragons and all this kind of stuff. And like there's these powerful elements in sea that God tames. And there's all this, so things move from disorder and chaos to order. And when God brings about judgment against whoever, he sometimes pulls back his ordering power and lets disorder overwhelm things. So this is what happens in the flood. All the language in the flood moves backwards from Genesis 1 and 2. Like the waters come up and the waters come down, everything is overwhelmed, and creation comes undone. And like in Lamentations and Jeremiah, when the prophet is like, everything's coming apart, this is horrible, he uses that language, like things are coming apart, sea is raging and God's not doing anything about it. And then oftentimes, I should say, the paradigmatic salvation story in the Bible is the Exodus. And like every time Jews talk about salvation throughout the rest of the Old Testament and in the Gospels, and even I was listening for the Romans passage today, when Paul talks about salvation in Romans, he uses Exodus language. And Exodus language involves God's people being pursued and being cornered against the sea. And God's breath blows and there's a way made through the sea. God basically uses his enemy to deliver his people through, and then pulls his hand back, and God's own enemy defeats God's enemy, the Egyptians, which is just really, really interesting. So, but that's sort of a paradigm. God doesn't sort of eliminate sea to bring his people through. He subdues sea and then delivers his people through. Okay, so that's important. God subdues sea and then delivers his people through. And basically the big picture is that's exactly what happens here in Acts 27. So in Acts 27, it's like, to this point, all these human enemies have tried to stop God's work. which is the spread of the gospel and the gospel getting to Rome. That's like the goal. All these human enemies have all taken their shots and they can't stop this. And now God's cosmic enemy is going to step on stage. So basically, everything in Acts has been leading up to chapter 27, where God is able now. It's like this has all been the undercard. This is the heavyweight fight. This is the main event where the two heavyweights step into the ring, and God and his chief enemy are going to battle it out. And what's interesting is that the human agents that are acting in this chapter, what is their experience of this chapter? They're totally vulnerable. I mean, they're completely helpless, right? I mean, they don't even really do anything except for Paul. He's the only one that sort of like takes initiative and acts in the face of what's happening. But what I thought was interesting is there's all these. I circled every word every time C was mentioned, and it's obviously it's used repeatedly. And ancient hearers of the story would be thinking totally in terms of chaos, like God's chief enemy, chaos, and storm, wind, hurricane, a wind of hurricane force. All of that is basically this chaos acting. And then there's loads of language here of hindrance, of prevention, which I thought was really interesting. The winds were against us in verse 4. We made slow headway for many days, had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. The wind did not allow us. Verse 8, we moved along with difficulty. Verse 9, much time had been lost. It became dangerous. Verse 12, the harbor was unsuitable. Verse 15, the ship was caught. It could not head into the wind. We were driven along. Verse 16, we were hardly able. Verse 17, the ship was driven. Verse 18, we took such a violent beating. Verse 20, the storm raged, just like the Psalm. This is all Psalms language, like Psalm 107, where the sailors were thrown into the water, or there was a big storm and they called on God and God's the one that rescued them. They finally gave up all hope. So this is exactly the kind of thing that ancient hearers would hear. And what's interesting is in verse 20, verse 20 is when things are actually the most desperate. And it's interesting if you have Genesis 1 and 2 in your minds, it's so interesting. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days. What would an ancient Jew, if someone familiar with scriptures, but even somebody familiar with any of the myths from around the ancient world, what would they hear? Yes, formless and void. This is before God harnessed the waters. Before he puts the lights in the sky. He puts the stars and the sun, the great light, the lesser light, and then the stars. So it's like, oh my word, we're moving backwards, like creation's coming undone. And that's why in the end of verse 20, he says we finally gave up all hope of being saved, because it's like the God who is the creator is about to lose and chaos is about to win. Like what? But that's when it's so interesting. That's when also there's another theme from the Old Testament. Usually when there's passages where there's combat between God and sea, or God and one of the other gods of the nations. If you think in terms of 1 Samuel 17, the David and Goliath passage is one of these. Gideon versus who is it? The Midianites. What's the other one? Oh, Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Yeah. These battles in the Old Testament where the way that they run is that the way that the Old Testament narrates these encounters is that the human agent in a divine warfare setting is always portrayed as having they don't have the credentials to be in this fight, like David. It's like when you read that narrative, the word man appears like 25 times in that narrative. It's like the men of Israel were afraid of the man. And so they went to the man Saul. They said, there's this man. And all the men were shaking and blah, blah, blah. It's all this man language. And then it says, it takes a turn. It says, now there was a boy. And he was the youngest. And he had never shaved. And it's like, he's like, it's like this guy is not equipped for this. But then he ends up defeating Goliath. And remember the Gideon passage where God says to Gideon, there's just way too many people. You have way too many men. He's got like, and Gideon was actually like a private warlord in that passage. He is a warrior. He has his own private armies. And God says, yeah, there's too many. Go down to the river and whoever dips their head in or whatever. And he ends up with like 300. And then the way they defeat the Midianites, they all blow horns and they smash jars. And it's like, what? It's a divine warrior passage where God sows chaos in the enemy camp. He uses chaos to actually defeat the Midianites. And then, anyway, just to say, in the Old Testament, when God shows up as the warrior on Israel's behalf, the human actor is always portrayed as facing overwhelming odds. So that's why Luke tells the story of Paul here. The odds are overwhelming. I mean, he can't defeat chaos, and he's a prisoner. And there's this one part where they, right before they get off the boat, all the soldiers are about to kill the prisoners. Remember that? Just the centurion says, "Don't do it." So there's a lot going on in this passage that Luke is doing that ancient hearers would have heard. And what's interesting in that setting, or I should say, given all of that, it's interesting that Paul actually ever gets the attention of, remember, he gives this prophecy in verse 10. Men, I can see, which is kind of what prophets talk about. They have this special insight into what's really happening. You can see their voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo. You don't want anybody saying that like when you're on an airplane. And then Paul again seizes the initiative there in verse 21 and 22, where he tells everybody, get something to eat. You're like, this is just not. Oh no, that's where he says that you should have taken my advice. I love that. I told you. That was hilarious. He starts giving one more. It's so funny. He starts giving another one of his speeches, and you can imagine one of the Roman soldiers going, "All right, enough. All right, give us the bottom line. We've already heard your defense. We've all read chapter 26." But what's interesting in the middle of all of that, I was just so struck by this in verse 35, where it says, after he said this, he took some bread, gave thanks to God in front of them all, then he broke it and began to eat. What does that remind you of? It's Luke 22. Luke has used that very language. And it's like, it's what it does for me is it makes me think about the Last Supper in terms of Jesus sort of supplying this banquet for his followers who are just about to betray him. But he supplies this banquet in the midst of chaos. Like he's facing chaos, like creation's coming undone for him, and he's about to be overwhelmed by death, but he supplies a banquet. And then it makes me think about this passage in light of the Last Supper passage. So again, we've talked about this before. I think that Luke, he narrates Jesus doing certain things in the Gospel of Luke, and then he narrates the actors in Acts doing things the way that Jesus did them in Luke. And so Paul is behaving like Jesus. He's taking bread, giving thanks, breaking it, and distributing it, which is really cool. And so there's a sense in which in the middle of this horrible, chaotic, where all the enemies are surging against God's movements, God is basically creating a banquet in the middle of this total shit show, is what I want to say. It's a total disaster.
They had the food, why hadn't they eaten for 14 days?
Yeah, it's a good question.
And then they threw out the grain, and there was an extra grain.
Yeah.
Maybe the storm was too rough, they couldn't make it.
Yeah, I think the way that I understand this, I mean, like these ships are not huge. And
267.
well, I guess maybe this one's slightly bigger.
No, but they must.
But also, it's like I think it's just complete desperation. Like, I mean, the helplessness of being on the seas, where well actually, yeah, if we think what I thought was also interesting is to look and read C as an actor and watch how C toys with the sailors. Like there's this one, I thought this was really interesting. When a gentle south wind began to blow, they saw their opportunity, so they weighed anchor. It's like C's like, okay, you're safe now. All right, I'll be placid for a bit to lure you back out. And then they go back out, and it's just like, I'm gonna pound you for a while. So I think it's just a sign that the sailors are desperate. Like this is complete desperation, and they're at their wits' end for like such a long time. And yeah, to unload cargo is just a survival strategy to just sort of try to get control of the ship. But yeah, the fact that they hadn't eaten, I don't know what exactly that means. Like, I mean, did not one person take a drink of water for 2 weeks or have any, sustenance for 2 weeks, or did they not sit down for a meal? I don't know what exactly that means, but they hadn't, I mean, they're just at their wits' end. So what Paul is actually inviting them to do, it's an act of defiance. Like, instead of looking out for our own survival, let's take a break and have let's have a meal. Let's act as if things are normal. When things are actually chaotic, and it's sort of like, if anything, it's a thumb in the nose or a thumb in the face. What's the expression? Yeah, thumbing the nose in the face of C by doing this. Does that make sense? And it's basically a way of saying, not that Paul is stronger than C, he's not, but God has promised that he's going to rescue them all together if they stay together, which is kind of an interesting message if you think back to like everything that was going on in Luke. And Luke is the one gospel where there's more meals than any other gospel. And it's all about fellowship and sharing together in ways that override how our corrupt culture tries to divide us. So across lines of gender, social class, ethnicity, creating these communities that celebrate together. Like, let's do what Jesus said to do in the middle of a chaotic situation is an act of defiance, really. Yeah, also the last thing I wanted to say about this is that sea journeys are really, really popular are common in ancient narratives. I mean, if you think of Homer and a lot of other, Jonah, there's all kinds of sea journeys in ancient literature. And you remember back to the Lost Stars of Pergamum, remember when Antipas, in his initial correspondences with Luke, is talking about how he's going to be taking a journey. So he prays to the god of the sea to protect him and when he wants healing, he talks about Asclepius. I mean, so you're talking about the god who has power over certain, aspects of the world. And so basically knowing how things happen at the divine level, that everything that happens on the earth has a heavenly correspondent. So the expectation would be that Paul going to Rome is going to be destroyed by sea, and that is going to be a representation of the verdict about Paul in the heavenly realm. Does that make sense? And so word would be spread. This guy actually was a criminal. We knew it. No human could find it out, but the gods have basically revealed it to us. And the fact that at that divine level, all hell is sort of unleashed on Paul and on his companions, and the fact that God preserves them through this is a resounding verdict that resonates with all the other verdicts throughout Acts, that we threw everything at him and we checked him out, and he hasn't done anything wrong. So that is up and running as well in this narrative.
And we kind of see that in parallel with the snake that happens a little later.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so like we haven't gotten there yet, but yeah, that happened. Like they land and then the snake bites them and everyone's like, oh, there it is. That's what's going to do him in. And it doesn't. Oh, actually, yeah. I mean, looking ahead, that's the language. In verse 4, when the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, this man must be a murderer, for though he escaped the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live. It's another one of these funny passages. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god. We've actually seen that before. Remember that when Paul and Silas were thought to be Hermes and Zeus, and it's like no, you're reading it wrongly. Anyway, so lots going on here in 26 and 27. Any before we close, any observations or comments about 27? Anybody ready to go sailing?
That is a fact.
I'm going ahead, but on our cruise we went to Malta.
Really?
Yeah, and I didn't know this until now.
Yeah. Right, watch out for snakes.
That's right. We didn't really like Malta. It was cool.
Well, you made it back. You must be a god.
No problem. No snake. No.
I like how in verses 31 and 32, you see they did finally start believing him and did what he said. That they like multiple times and like trying to give warnings.
And so this is what you're saying, like, this is why. This is why we slow things down and zoom the camera in, and we're taking the longest possible look at this ship disaster. Because it meant so much. It really spoke something to ancient people that it doesn't.
Yeah.
It just doesn't resonate with us. Is that?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have the ears to. I mean, we don't have the lenses. It's not the way that we would tell a story necessarily. You know. Yeah, totally.
Let's go ahead, scratch.
Yeah, but that's why there's all those psalms about like where the psalmist is looking out on the sea and he's like he sees the thunder clouds, he sees the thunderstorm over the sea, and he says the thunder like breaks out over the sea. The voice of Yahweh thunders over Yom, the sea, and it's like and he keeps saying that in different ways for like 8 verses. I remember when I was reading my Bible when I was far younger, like, what? This is not warming to my heart. Like, what? I don't get any of it. Like, why? But it's like basically in the ancient world, all these ancient cultures had memories of floods that devastated them in various ways. And so they were like, man, you don't mess with that. Don't mess with that's chaos over there. And so you lived as far away from water as you could. And rivers and lakes were less threatening, but they were still troublesome. And so when you have a psalm like that, it's like God, the psalmist is celebrating the fact that Yahweh, the creator God, is thumping his chest like I own you. See, I mean, it's like it's not how we would say things. In fact, Baal, the Canaanites thought their god Baal was the voice that thunder was the voice of Baal, and lightning was Baal's voice, and so a lot of Israel's psalms were sort of borrowed over from Canaanite culture, and they just rewrote them and said Yahweh that's his voice, and that's why it's really critical. When Elijah faces the prophets of Baal, because remember that passage, Elijah versus the prophets of Baal in where is that? I can't. Is in one of the Kings, and the language there is really, really fascinating because what Elijah does, he's the only prophet, and there's 300 prophets of Baal. Remember, he douses the altar and douses it again. And what comes down from heaven is lightning, because that's what Baal would do. But it's Yahweh that has the lightning and the thunder. And then Elijah says, all right, over to you fellas, see what you can do with yours. And for 6 hours, the prophets gash themselves and call on Baal to like burn up the sacrifice. And the comment by the narrator is, there was no answer, there was no voice. There was no answer. It just keeps saying it. Like Baal's mute. There's no, because Baal is not a fan. Anyway. But yeah, Jill, we just don't have the ears to hear all this stuff. But in the ancient world, it's like, yeah, this like resonated.
Yeah.
In fact, it's like, it's almost a way of saying this is what's been happening for 26 chapters, is that agents of chaos and disorder and anti-godness have been raging against God's work and have failed. And now, like, take away all the human actors, sea itself is now going to go at Paul and can't do it. God's work is relentlessly moving forward.
I think the calming of the sea
Yes, totally.
is like you, even though they were growing in their faith,
Yeah.
that had to be a big one. You know,
The same language. That is exactly the same thing, Marilyn. There's like, you know, the disciples are freaked out because wind and waves, it's the same language, are basically they're gonna destroy us. And when Jesus rebukes wind and waves and they listen to him, it's like, whoa, nobody talks to wind and waves. You know, like but again, threatening situation, rescue. So that's kind of like things move in that direction.
fucking fires.
Yeah. Well, it's in Job, which has so much of this language. In Job, God is the one who is the wave treader. He's the one who walks on the water, and like not that that's like so impressive. It is in itself, but it's like it's an image of domination. It's not an image of like fascination. Like, whoa, who can do that? It's an image of domination. I own you. And so when Jesus is walking on the water in the Gospels, it's not like, whoa, who can do that? He's the one that owns chaos, and chaos listens to him. Doesn't listen to anybody else. All right, we should draw to a close there. And just a reminder, next month is chapter 28. And come prepared to just share what you've been struck by, what you'd want to ask Luke if he were around, what you learned, and what made you hungry about Luke's compositions.
All right. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate your insights on that. So yeah, to round us out, we'll have one final scripture reading here. Jonathan's going to do the Hebrew version of this verse. Take it away, Jonathan.
Hello, everyone. Here is how it works. It was through one individual that sin entered the world, and through sin, death. And in this way, death passed through to the whole human race, inasmuch as everyone sinned. Sin was indeed present in the world before Torah was given, but sin was not counted as such when there is no Torah. Nevertheless, death ruled from Adam until Moshe, even over those whose sinning was not exactly like Adam's violation of a direct command. In this, Adam prefigured the one who was to come. But the free gift is not like the offense. For if, because of one man's offense, many died, then how much more has God's grace, that is, the gracious gift of one man, Yeshua, the Messiah, overflowed to many? No, the free gift is not like what resulted from one man's sinning. Far from one sinner, for from one sinner came judgment that brought condemnation, but the free gift came after many offenses and brought acquittal. For if, because of the offense of one man, death ruled through that one man, how much more will those receiving the overflowing grace, that is, the gift of being considered righteous, rule in life through the one man, Yeshua the Messiah? In other words, just as it was through one offense that all people came under condemnation, so also it is through one righteous act that all people come to be considered righteous. For just as through the disobedience of the one man many were made sinners, so also through the obedience of the other man many will be made righteous.
Thanks, Jonathan. Actually, I should have left that up there. Joanna is going to lead us in the benediction.
God to enfold you, Christ to uphold you, Spirit to keep you in heaven's sight. So may God grace you, heal and embrace you, lead you through darkness into the light. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks, everyone.